Hey guys, welcome back to Mominatrix Mondays. Sorry I'm late, I got busy this week. So I promised you guys a couple videos ago that I was going to do a tutorial on whips. And so that's what this is. The first probably about 3 or 4, just covering different kinds of whips and their use in training your mythical beasts. If your mythical beast is here for particularly exciting and uncomfortable levels of training. So the whip we're going to be using today is called a snake whip. The main difference between a bull whip, a snake whip, and a signal whip is the handles. So a bull whip has the longer, rigid, usually wooden, sometimes bone or other material, handles, out of which extends the thong. The thong is the part that actually wiggles around. A snake whip is flexible from base to tip. It has a movable handle. A shorter version, which can fit inside of a purse, is called a signal whip, and most commonly encountered by women who use it for self-defense in certain parts of the world. But today we're going to be using a snake whip. I will do a signal whip later because the signal whip is probably the optimal tool for indoor whipping use. Now let's get started. All right. So the first thing that I want to cover, guys, is doing a couple of the basic, more intimidating whip cracks. So the loud sonic boom sound, that is not something you want to do to your mythical beast. The way that whips were originally designed was to scare the beast, to scare the animal, not for contact. You wouldn't want to do that to an actual animal. The reason for that is, like I mentioned in my previous video, that will lacerate the skin. It will cause bleeding. There's a few different ways to crack your whip. The first, the forward crack, which looks a little something like this. And as you can see, I'll run that through you in slow motion, or for you in slow motion. So my hand is starting out straight forward. I'm coming up to a 90-degree angle. I'm letting the whip fall behind me, and then bringing it forward again at 90 degrees. And you can see that again. Okay? The second kind of crack that I want to teach you about, an overhead crack. And that one is louder. It's more intimidating, but it's also a little bit more of a challenge. What it usually looks like is something like this.
You okay?
I'm not cutting that out.
Okay.
That went right next to my head.
Oh.
Very loud. A common mistake that people make is thinking that they need to like swing their whip in a circle. What's actually happening is the whip is coming, change my angle a little bit, coming at a crescent moon shape and then traveling right back along the same arc. That is what's causing the sharp turn of the clapper, and that's what's causing this tip to break the sound barrier, which is what makes the crack. And then the last one, which is more of the common one that I like to use, is really more of a basic flick of the wrist, kind of an underhand crack. It's light, it's easy, goes a little something like this. All I'm doing is bringing the wrist up and then bringing it back down. You want to terrify your mythical beast? That's going to scare your mythical beast into behaving. A lot of times when you have a mythical beast that's not cooperating, maybe they're one of those particularly hard to train beasts. This can be a very useful tool in securing their compliance. Now, to move forward away from the intimidation factor, I want to talk about how to utilize this in the actual training of your beast. We're going to use a controlled, lighter motion. Something like this. And it can have a little bit of a crack. It can have no crack at all. The less crack there is, the easier it is on your mythical beast skin. Of course, we can go full force, but you'll break skin. It's a lot simpler and a lot less work on your wrist and on your arm to gently flick it. You can also practice using that underhand flick, but the main thing that you want to work on when you're practicing with your whip is accuracy. Learning the distance at which you can crack and learning how to hit a target. What I suggest, if you're in your house, to pick something like a light switch or a doorknob, a small target that's not easily destroyed and not in the way of anything that's going to cause a lot of damage. And all you're going to do is flick at that target. If you're outside, trees work great, especially in the fall when they're already going to be losing their leaves. You can use targets that are on the ground. That leaf right there, it's a real obvious little pile. Working on accuracy, working on your light controlled flick. Now, if you start trying to use multiple flicks at once, this can be difficult to do. You lose control. So I personally prefer to gain control of the whip every single time. You can do this at a very close range, but the closer you get, the more likely you are to err. What you don't want to have happen in the middle of a scene while you're training your mythic beast is you hit them in the eye or another sensitive part of the body that they're not particularly prepared for when it comes to training. There are some sensitive areas of the body that the mythical beast likes to be hit, depending on your mythical beast. But the eye is usually not one of them. The eyes, the mouth, generally places we want to avoid. Common targets that are good for training your mythical beasts are thighs, the quarters, the legs, the haunch, and the back, obviously. Those are less sensitive areas, more prone to enjoyment of the type of training that we're doing. So there's your basic rules. Accuracy, gentleness, don't go too hard, don't go too fast. Don't try to break your beast with your whip. The other thing that's super important is care for your whip. You can buy online various conditioners and whip oils. Especially if you have a leather whip, it's very important to make sure that your whip stays clean and oiled. The nicer the whip, the more care you want to take for it, obviously. But that doesn't mean this whip, as an example, was $12. Not a very expensive tool. But if you don't care for them, whether they're expensive or they're cheap, they will fall apart. The braiding of the whip will start to degrade. The end of the whip will fall apart. I already had to trim this one down. Commonly what I would recommend is when you get your whip, if it has an end like this, where it's not braided into the actual, where the clapper is not braided into the whip itself, use crazy glue or some other kind of intense adhesive to glue those ends together. Your clapper will fall apart and deteriorate over time, and you will need to replace it. If you have a quality whip, you're going to have to go through several of these. If you have a low quality whip, by the time you go through this is probably going to break anyway. So a good quality whip is going to run you a couple $100s, and it's a bit of an investment. I wouldn't recommend starting with it. I'd recommend starting with a cheap whip. And if you want to continue using whips for training, eventually you will want to invest in a high quality one that will last you the duration of your training of your mythical beast. I will include a link in the description below. I can't remember the name of the product right now, but I will include a link in the description below of the most highly recommended leather care oil for whips, and it's also the one that I most highly recommend. You have to order it online. I haven't found it in any stores here in the US. I think you can find it in stores in the UK though. All right guys, I'll see you next week. Take care now.